Advocates demand action for refugee shelter funding amid federal cuts. Welcome to Regent Park TV. I'm Samuel. Today, we're taking a closer look at a critical moment at Toronto's Executive Committee, chaired by Mayor Olivia Chow, where city leaders, advocates, and community members raised urgent concerns about federal and provincial funding cuts for housing. Right now, 3,420 refugees, making up nearly 40% of all clients in Toronto's shelter system, rely on city shelters to have a safe place to sleep. But federal and provincial decisions have slashed funding by millions, threatening thousands of lives and deepening the homelessness crisis. Officials warned that federal and provincial funding cuts could force Toronto to raise property taxes and leave thousands without shelter. For neighborhoods like ours, where many residents know the challenges of housing instability, this discussion is more than policy. It's about protecting lives and ensuring everyone has a place to call home. Let's take a closer look at this segment of the meeting and hear directly from the leaders and advocates demanding the federal government pay its bill for refugee shelter funding.
Thank you, committee. I am presenting this letter not just as myself, but on behalf of—
Your mic on?
Should be.
Yep. Oh, better.
Now.
Thank you.
Okay. As I said, I am not presenting this on behalf of just myself, Diana Chan McNally, but also on behalf of a number of organizations and individuals who have signed on, and I will read the letter to you. We all have human rights, or none of us do. The federal government's decision to cut funding for refugee shelter under the Interim Housing Assistance Program, or IHAP, ensures that there are human rights for some, but not for others, specifically for refugees who are already fleeing the direst of circumstances in the pursuit of basic safety. Not only do these funding cuts contravene Canada's international human rights commitments, but they also violate its federal laws. Under international covenants, Canada has a legal obligation to ensure access to shelter and housing without discrimination, including on the grounds of immigration status or nationality. Cuts to IHAP funding also undermine the federal government's own statutory commitments in the National Housing Strategy Act, including to the right to housing and the needs of equity-seeking groups. And, as Toronto I saw in 2023, reducing funds for refugee shelter also places refugees at serious risk of harm, including death, a clear violation of their charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person. These are not arbitrary arguments. They are clear, legal, and human rights obligations. Cutting IHAP funding for refugee shelter also creates costs elsewhere, including to the healthcare system, public transit, community services, and private business. Placing this financial burden on an already overburdened healthcare system would create dire outcomes for everyone seeking healthcare service, particularly in emergency departments where people often seek shelter. For Toronto's TTC system, their libraries, community centers, campuses, and businesses, specifically malls, coffee shops, and quick-serve restaurants, refugees seeking de facto shelter in these spaces would create a financial and labor cost. For refugees who can't find shelter and are forced to live outdoors and in encampments, the cost of outreach, policing, of emergency services would outstrip the cost of simply granting people safe shelter. Most of these costs will be municipally borne, which is unfair. But some will be paid by nonprofits, post-secondaries, BIAs, and individual businesses. This is, in effect, an abandonment of federal responsibility. To be clear, refugees are unequivocally a federal responsibility. This responsibility was affirmed in 2023 when the federal government provided Toronto with IHAP funding to shelter thousands of refugees who were languishing on the street. We all saw that. The federal government made a promise of continued funding for refugees who still require substantial shelter beds in Toronto. Cuts to IHAP funding are shirking a federal responsibility as well as a broken promise to the City of Toronto, let alone a violation of the law, their own laws, and Canada's human rights obligations, as well as an unnecessary financial burden on those who should not be carrying it. Clearly, the legal case, the business case, and the humanitarian case are all aligned. The federal government must be aligned as well. As signatories on this letter, we affirm that the federal government must fulfill its promise to the City of Toronto by continuing to provide full IHAP funding to meet the real need for refugee shelter for as long as it is required. The alternative is simply too great of a cost to bear. And I'll read the organizational signatories on this letter. Advocacy Centre for Tenants Ontario, the Anglican Diocese of Toronto, Christie Refugee Welcome Centre, College Street United Church, Covenant House Toronto, CUPE Ontario, Crossroads Theatre, Dixon Hall, Eva's Initiatives for Homeless Youth, HIV Legal Network, Jane Finch Community and Family Centre, More Neighbours Toronto, My Brother's Keeper Parkdale, National Right to Housing Network, Neighbourhood Legal Services, Progress Toronto, Right to Housing Toronto, Romero House, Social Planning Toronto, Social Rights Advocacy Centre, Sojourn House, St. Felix Centre, St. Michael's Academic Family Health Team, the Neighbourhood Group Community Services, Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction, Toronto Neighbourhood Centres, Toronto Shelter Network, Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union, Unison Health and Community Services, Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, Workers' Action Centre, York Southwestern Tenant Union, and YWCA Toronto. We stand in agreement that this is a federal responsibility and they must pay their bill.
We suffered a tragedy in our community. There was a young lady in her early 30s. She came not so long ago. She lived at our church for a few days, and then she found a shelter in one of the shelters in Toronto. She had other things going on for her besides looking for a bed. She struggled with a mental illness and other settlement-related stressors. Unfortunately, a combination of all those stressors led her to believe that ending her life was the only option that was left. She followed through with that. She ended her life, and we buried her last Thursday. I want to start there, not to grieve anyone here, but also to thank the City of Toronto. When I heard of that tragic loss, I immediately texted Vera, who is now a friend because of how we partner in trying to just make sure there's no one who is on the street. Together, very quickly, speaking with our friend Gordon, they put together a team that came to attend the burial. I have never seen this in all the years that I have dealt with the city. I wanted to start by expressing my gratitude on behalf of the family. Thank you. Yes, a shelter bed is good, but when you show up to something like that, there's a level of support that the family receives that can't quite be put in words. So I wanted to express my gratitude on behalf of the family. I noticed in the recommendations that Mayor Chow gave, we want, on behalf of the African Canadian Collective, who I sit here and privileged to represent, also on behalf of Dominion House of Hope, a place where on an average between July 2023 and January 2024, an average of 200 people were sleeping in the church pews. Not because we had the resources to house them, but because we did not have the option to just keep looking on while they slept on the street. I'm here today primarily to express our shared concern, Mayor Chow. When you say that you're worried that the 2023 July incident, or trauma, if I should call it, is being threatened to repeat by these cuts, we are here to express that we share those concerns. I have been a pastor for so many years. I have never been stressed and challenged as I was during those months when at about 1 a.m. as I left the church to go to my house, I drove past 8 people wanting to get in, but I knew that I could not let them in because we were full beyond capacity. In fact, if I can go full confession, we violated some of the capacity rules. And I know the fire marshal knows that already. But it was so painful for me to drive home knowing that in this country and in this sanctuary city we live in, there are people who are going to sleep outside the church. Some of them shivering because it was, some days were very cold. I wanted to come here specifically to express to whoever cares to hear, but specifically the federal government, that we are worried that decision that you're about to make, if you go through with it, it really threatens a repeat of an incident that some of us keep praying that we never live to see. That is primarily why I came here. There are things we can do to guarantee a good outcome for African refugees or for Black refugees or for anyone who is looking for a bed. But there are also decisions that we can do that guarantee negative outcomes. I pray that since we have a little bit of time before that decision is confirmed, I pray that we make a decision that guarantees positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to the pastor? No? Thank you so much for your compassion and that feeling. Let's be hopeful. Let's do it. And thank you for acknowledging the staff that are also very caring to come to the funeral. Yeah. Keep up your good work. Tammy Yakubu.
Good morning, Mayor Chow. Thank you to the members of the Executive Committee for hearing my deputation this morning. My name is Tammy Yakubu. I work for the Toronto Shelter and Support Services. I have been an employee of the City of Toronto for 4 years. I have had the privilege of working in several portfolios within the City of Toronto, many of them in hotel programs that are male-dominated environments. Through the work, I've had direct experience supporting refugee clients as they arrive at our shelters. When a refugee client comes through our doors, I am often the first person they meet. I sit with them, listen to their story, and complete their intake, collecting the basic information about their background and the circumstances that brought them here. Once this is done, they are connected with a counselor who helps them access critical resources, how to apply for work permits, how to get legal aid, and how to begin their journey towards refugee claimant status. But the support cannot stop there. While they wait for their work permits, I facilitate resume workshops to prepare them for employment. I encourage them to volunteer in their communities so they can gain Canadian experience, so they can make connections and ease the culture shock that so many of them face when they first arrive. I have seen firsthand that these resources work. Refugees want to contribute, to learn, and to belong. When the federal government cuts funding, it is not just numbers on a budget line that disappear. It is the tools, workshops, and opportunities that help people rebuild their lives. Without these supports, newcomers are left most vulnerable, isolated, and unable to contribute their full potential to Canadian society. Refugees are not a burden. They are people, skilled, resilient, and ready to give back when we give them the chance. Cutting funding denies them that chance and ultimately weakens our communities. I am here this morning because I want to raise a number of concerns I have around the news I have heard with cuts to funding that help provide services for refugees. It is the responsibility of the federal government to fund housing programs for refugees because that is the level of government that creates conditions that allow refugees to come into Canada. In my work, I have met many wonderful refugees who are in our country in search of more opportunities. Like anyone else in our city, refugees deserve to have a roof over their head, whether that's in a shelter space or in a home that it is their own. I want to tell a story about a client that I have worked with. A large number of the refugees I have worked with are from African countries, such as Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and so much more. Many come to Canada in search of a better life, not just for themselves, but also for their families and the loved ones they have left behind. What people often don't realize is that many of these newcomers are highly educated and deeply skilled. Among them, we have doctors, we have teachers, we have nurses, we have farmers, all with valuable expertise. The challenge is not a lack of ability or motivation. The challenge is a lack of tools and resources that allow them to fully use their skills. Without adequate support, many refugees end up staying in shelters much longer than expected. Not because they don't want to move forward, but because they face systemic barriers that prevent them from contributing their talent to Canadian society. I also want to speak about my colleagues in Toronto shelters who are doing this incredible work. Shelter workers do not get into this line of work to get rich. We do this because we care about our communities and about Toronto's most vulnerable people. Every day, my colleagues work with unhoused folks, help people feel welcome, provide casework and support services, place people into shelter spaces, visit street-involved residents, check in with people on transit, and so much more. I am proud of the work I do and of the work workers in our city do. I understand that the federal government has told the City of Toronto that it plans to cut over $100 million to the budget to the Interim Housing Assistance Program in this year alone. This money is crucial to making sure my colleagues and I continue delivering high-quality care for our neighbors.
Thank you.
In closing, at the heart of this conversation is a simple truth. Refugees do not come to Canada to take. They come to build, to give, and to belong.
Thank you so much.
I have witnessed, I'm almost done. I have witnessed their resilience, their talents, and their determination. Cutting funding for refugees does not save money. It costs us the very contribution that make our community stronger. Let us not turn our backs on people who are ready to work, to learn, and to thrive. Instead, let us invest in them. Because when refugees succeed, Canada succeeds.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Next speaker. Thank you for doing the tough work that you do and rebuilding refugees' lives. Okay, Juliana, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Juliana Wanali, and I want to thank the Executive Committee for taking the time to listen to me today. I work with Toronto Shelter and Support Services as a client service worker and also an AR shifty at one of the men's shelter. I serve as a frontline worker supporting homeless clients referred from various shelters across the GTA. My role involves performing initial screening, assessing client eligibility for emergency shelter program, admitting new clients, and helping them integrate into the shelter environment. I do this by providing a tour, explaining our rules and policy, reviewing fire safety procedure, and introducing them to the housing first philosophy of the City of Toronto. Today, my colleague and I are here to dispute about the very dangerous proposed cut to the housing program that supports refugees in our city. I know it's not common to see a City of Toronto shelter worker disputing, but we work long hours every week supporting our most vulnerable residents, and it's difficult to find the time to be here. But we both feel it was critical to speak about on this issue because cutting funding for essential refugee services will make our city worse. Our shelters are already under immense pressure to meet the needs of unhoused people in Toronto. I can't begin to imagine how our program will be affected by such significant funding cuts. Many refugees come to the shelter system in extremely vulnerable state. Most have never traveled outside their home country, especially those from developing nations with little or no exposure to a place like Canada. For them, the shelter is their first experience of safety and stability. It's where they begin to understand and integrate into a new country and culture. They meet others in similar situations and they begin to heal. Our staff provide critical support, helping with legal hearing, work permits, mental health check-ins, and more. At my location at 76 Travelers Hostel, where I work, I've supported refugees from all over the world. One client who was a nurse back in his country, with the help of my supervisor. He was able to get a job at one of the hospitals with the city. I also help another client with his security license. These individuals are now paying taxes and contributing meaningfully to their new community. The pathway to healing and building a new life in Canada begins in the shelter for most of these refugees. Refugees gain courage, resilience, and hope. Cutting funding undermines Canada's commitment to its humanitarian value and to the principles of the United Nations. I am deeply alarmed by the proposed cuts to refugee programs funding. We need more workers in our shelter, not fewer. We need more programs to transition people into permanent housing, not fewer. We need a better, more accessible shelter system, not one that is harder to access. Thank you for considering the item today, and thank you for advocating to the provincial and federal government for appropriate funding of this essential program. Thank you, everybody.
Leslie Gash.
Good morning, Executive Committee, and thank you for putting this last-minute item on the agenda at the end of last week. My name is Leslie Gash, and I'm the Executive Director of the Toronto Shelter Network. TSN connects and supports Toronto's homelessness service providers and also prioritizes working with people with lived experience of homelessness, ensuring their voices, insights, and needs shape how our services are designed and delivered. Together, we support emergency shelters, respites, and women's 24-hour drop-ins across Toronto to more effectively meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness. We are gathered today to raise urgent alarm over the federal government's decision to cut back funding to the Interim Housing Assistance Program, which has provided critical support for refugee claimants who come to Toronto seeking safety and shelter. From the shelter system's perspective, these cuts will have devastating consequences. Shelters are not just a roof over someone's head. They are vital lifelines offering refuge, community, and support for refugees arriving in Toronto with nowhere else to turn. For many, shelter is their first experience of safety in a new country, a place to recover, access resources, and begin rebuilding their lives. Since September 2021, the number of refugee claimants using Toronto's shelter system has surged dramatically. The number of refugee claimants accommodated by the City of Toronto has increased more than 11 times, from 530 people per night in 2021 to 6,500 in August 2024. Even now, more than 3,500 refugees, which is about 40% of all shelter clients, rely on emergency shelter every night. Toronto continues to shoulder this responsibility more than any other municipality in Canada. This rapid and sustained influx has put incredible pressure on our shelters. Their dedication is immense, but without federal support through IHAP, the capacity to shelter refugees is at risk of collapsing. The federal government has offered the City of Toronto only 39% of the requested IHAP funding for January 2025 to March 2027. They should continue to reimburse the city and at 95% of the costs incurred. Now, with funding cuts and new cost-sharing requirements shifting the burden onto municipalities, the sustainability of shelter services is in jeopardy. Let me be clear, it is impossible for the city or shelters to simply stop providing shelter to refugee claimants in the system or those currently experiencing homelessness, and nor would we want to withdraw support. Without funding, many refugees will be forced back onto the streets like we saw in 2023, leading to increased encampments, heightened health and safety risks, and a crisis that will ripple through our entire community. The lack of stable funding will also prolong the time refugee claimants must spend in the general shelter system, delaying their transition to more appropriate, affordable, refugee-specific housing solutions. Adding to this is the reduction to the COB program that will only provide funding for 40 more households until March, which will further exacerbate the situation. The federal and provincial governments must increase Toronto's allocation to allow more households to benefit from this lifeline program. The federal government must honor its commitments and recognize the responsibility for immigration and refugee protection is theirs, not the sole burden of municipalities. We call for a national coordinated refugee response system that supports municipal governments and ensures a compassionate, efficient, and sustainable approach to refugee arrivals. At TSN, we have seen firsthand the transformative power of shelter for refugee claimants. The next deputant is part of our pipeline project, and he's here today to share his experience and speak to the importance of shelter, not just for him, but for many of his peers. TSN supports the recommendations of the Mayor's report. The lives and well-being of thousands of refugees and the strength of our shelter system depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Isaac Kasunsi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you to the city, the committee, and the mayor for this opportunity to share with you. My name is Isaac, and I'm a refugee claimant from Uganda. I want to speak today about the important role that IHOP plays in supporting people like me who are new to the country and the shelter services. When I first arrived to Canada, I had nowhere to go. The shelter system was my lifeline. It provided me with not just a roof over my head, but community and other resources. Without that support, I would have felt lost and isolated. And the shelter offered me a place where I could feel human again and connect with others facing similar issues. From there, I started moving forward, and I remember being helped by shelter staff in navigating like job seeking and writing resumes, and sometimes even a place to like just vent and someone to talk to. I urge everyone to reconsider what these fund cuts could actually do to me and other people who have been in a similar position or who are in a similar position. Because many of my peers will be left out without shelter and forced to the streets owing to unsafe conditions, honestly. The risk of mental health crisis and all of that soars up with budget cuts and all that. And physical health will decline due to exposure to poor living conditions and lack of access to basic needs. The fragile progress we have made in creating permanent supportive housing solutions will be undone. Shelters are more than just buildings. They're lifelines to a lot of people. They offer refuge from danger and despair and a foundation for refugees to regain dignity, access, help, and begin healing from the trauma that they've actually gone through. That is what shelters did for me. So, with the support of frontline staff and case managers of these shelters, I began to heal and regain my dignity to where I am now. Right now, I'm working with the Toronto Shelter Network under the Toronto Shelter Network Employment Pipeline program, and I'm working towards getting full-time employment. None of this would have been possible without shelters, honestly. These cuts will not just affect numbers on a page; they will harm real people with real stories, dreams, and potential. I urge the federal government and this committee to recognize that sheltering refugees is a federal responsibility. We need full funding to ensure no one is left out in the cold and to protect health, safety, and the future of refugees in our city. Please stand with us. Please ensure that no one is left without shelter, community, or hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford, you have a question?
Isaac, I just wanted to thank you for coming. I heard you speak this morning at the press conference, and as many of the voices here who are deputing, and I just want to thank you for the commitment to spend a whole morning to share that story and to share how shelter was a lifeline for you. Thank you.
Samuel Kisitu.
Thank you very much, Mayor Olivia. My name is Samuel Kisitu. Good morning, friends, frontline workers, and community leaders. My name is Samuel Kisitu. I am a refugee from Uganda. I am here to represent the coalition of African-led organizations in Canada, which comprises of refugee-serving organizations, which were an invisible force before the coming of Mayor Olivia Chow. When you visited us at Dominion Church, you became more seen and visible. Thank you. That was during the African refugee housing crisis, as it's quoted in the media, in 2023. I speak today not only for myself, But for so many thousands of African refugees, asylum seekers, and unhoused people being pushed to the margins by the cuts to housing and shelter supports. Like many opposition supporters of the National Unity Platform, rooted in the People Power movement, represented by the billet I have on my head, being killed, abducted, imprisoned, tortured by President Museveni's regime as Ugandans head towards yet another election in 2026 January. His 40-year dictatorship has taken countless lives since the Luwero Triangle War, which killed half a million of people, including my family members. When Museveni wanted power in 1986, he made my homeland, my village, his battleground. Because my support for Bobi Wine made me Museveni's target, I fled Uganda in 2019, finding a home away from home in Toronto. Here in Toronto, I faced new struggles before I finally got a home in Toronto Community Housing in December 2023. I was one of over 15,000 people experiencing homelessness, as recorded in the city's 2024 Street Needs Assessment. I know what it means to have nowhere to go in a Canadian winter. When the Premier Dogford told people to stay at home during COVID-19, I had no home. I slept in Dominion Church, in the church storage of Dominion Church International Toronto, and moved between shelters, Seaton House, Fred Victor, Cornerstone Men's Shelter, trying to find safety and dignity. During that time, I worked as a personal support worker, risking my life to care for others. My story was covered in the Toronto Star and Regent Park TV because it reflects what so many refugees, migrant workers, and non-documented people, frontline workers endure. Andre Howarth once called me a hero to families. But I want to tell this gathering that heroes don't wear medals. Heroes instead need housing, justice at work, and migration status. For context, my story's resilience in the city, Samuel Kisitu's journey as an African refugee in Toronto, covered by Regent Park TV in 2023. Also, after 5 years, I had an interview of the story named Living Refugee Struggles and Housing Hardships, a 5-year journey from Uganda to Toronto, also covered by Regent Park TV. Today, Toronto Executive Committee is debating item EX 26.13, cuts to federal and provincial support for housing. On behalf of our communities, I call on the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, to pay your bills. The federal government owes Toronto $107 million to keep refugees and asylum seekers safe and housed. We're all aware that the decisions made in Ottawa, City Hall, and they determine our living conditions. If Ottawa refuses, thousands who rely on HEAP and COHAB to pay rent will be left on the streets. Families, last month, May 2024,
yes.
I reunited with my family, and I faced yet another struggle of how to host a family of 5. Happy to have a baby, but it all costed me a lot to house me as many people are also looking for a place to be housed.
Samuel, thank you so much. You're more than 5 minutes. It's
Sure.
now 6 minutes, so
Thank you
let's
very
wrap
much.
up. Thank you. And it's good that you now found housing. It's great.
Thank you very
Thank you for your work. Francesca, you're here. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Francesca Alodi-Ross. I serve as Executive Director of Romero House. We are a transitional housing provider for refugee claimant families. We've been around since 1991, and we are often the first place that refugee claimants contact when they arrive to Canada. They're sent to us from border agents. They find us on Google. Increasingly, they find us on ChatGPT. And we, 2 years ago, had to deal with the fallout of the incredible lack of shelter spaces for refugee claimants. It was very difficult for, obviously, the people sleeping outside, and also for our staff team to have to tell them day in, day out that we don't have anywhere for them to sleep, and we don't know where they should go, and they should try sleeping at the airport, or there are certain parks we hear are better than others. So I'm very grateful to the city for the work that was done to increase shelter capacity. Because of the work of Team SSS, we were able to expand our bed count last year, and we opened 40 new beds for refugee claimants. If these cuts happen, we may need to close that building and all of the wraparound support that we provide for families. Yeah, I'm very worried about that. Yes, refugee claims are down compared to last year, but we are still expecting over 100,000 refugee claimants in 2025, which is, compared to 10 years ago when there were 25,000, that's not going to change significantly. So we need to invest in solutions. We all want to move away from hotels that are expensive and not good for claimants. And that takes money to open new shelter spots, and we need the federal government and all levels of government to participate in those sustainable solutions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Questions to Deputy
I just had a
Councillor
question.
Coe? Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned you're anticipating 100,000 refugee claimants.
In 2025. We're already, the first half of the year saw more than 50,000.
So 100,000 people will be looking to you for housing this year that are refugee claimants.
Well, this is across Canada.
Oh, it's across Canada.
Yeah, the majority come to Ontario, and the most number come to Ontario, and most of those come to Toronto.
How many would be coming to Toronto, you think? What's the projection?
I don't know. I want to say like 40% maybe are in Ontario or more. And to Toronto, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Deputy Mayor Orley.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to pull that thread because my ears also perked up at that number, and I know it's been a point of discussion amongst my colleagues of how we track and how we coordinate what we're anticipating. And I know in this space it's a difficult one, but it obviously helps us to be proactive when we have information. So I'm just wondering where and how you're tracking those numbers and sort of anticipating those pressures.
So we get numbers from IRCC, Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, and Canada Border Services Agency. There are changes that the federal government is proposing in Bill C-2, for example, to try to further limit options for people to make refugee claims, and yeah, which I don't agree with, but I think we will see some decrease. But not significant. People find ways to come here. We've seen that since 1991. We've seen ebbs and flows. People will continue to come.
My name is Kizito Msalmana. I'm the founder of the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center. I'm also leading the African Canadian Collective, which, as you know, is a group of agencies that came together during the crisis of 2023. One of the groups, anyways, because there are so many people that stepped up. And I want to say that before I say anything else, that I support, and I'm speaking in support of the recommendations to obviously get the federal government to pay up. As you know, back in 2023, the Black community and other refugee-serving organizations stood up to support and to take on the responsibility of the government. We stood up because the government couldn't decide who was responsible. I would say today we know who is responsible, and we're asking that that party takes on its responsibility, because not doing so means death. We lost so many people during that crisis. We had organizations that went bankrupt. We have agencies that are now burned out, and many people who are traumatized as a result, both individuals who suffered the crisis, obviously the refugees who were sleeping outside, but also the organizations that took on the burden of the government. My organization, similar to many other agencies, we have had to do things that were not in line with our mission. For example, when the crisis happened, for me particularly, which happened across from our office, and that's how we got involved, we became a refugee-serving agency. We were not that. Our mission is to provide mental health services and resources to African agencies. But we had to do this work because it was required, it was needed. What we are asking, and what we are asking the federal government and the government in general, is to do your job so we can do our job better. Not doing your job takes our resources away from what we're supposed to do. As you know, as a person who lived through the genocide, 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda, there is so much we could be doing. But of course, we cannot do that if people are traumatized, if people have no places to stay, if people have no food in their homes. So we are forced to do more than we're supposed to be doing. So we're asking the federal government to step up, to pay its bills, so we can come back to the city and talk about other businesses, like providing cultural services, like coming and we've been working with the Toronto Shelter Support Services to find a way to implement some of the cultural services that we know are needed. I've been visiting shelters. I've visited the Peer Welcome Center. We've visited a couple of shelters in Toronto. We know that there are services that we can provide to help some of these refugees and others move out into society. But we can't do that if there is no resources to even house them in the first place. So we're asking the federal government once again to take that action, to make sure that the iHub funding are restored, that we have, and this is important, that we have enough money to provide wraparound. Because providing housing alone is not enough. Providing food and bed is not enough. We have to make sure that they have, and again, I love this piece from Peel, but it's also what we are doing in our transitional housing, which was recently funded by a private foundation. We are providing transitional housing for African refugees. What we find works is the wraparound, it's the employment support, it's the mental health support, it's the making sure they have everything that they need so they can focus on one thing, which is to how do we get ourselves off of our feet. So once again, we know who is responsible. We are asking that they take the action. We can do better. We must do better. Go Blue Jays.
I'm here to lend my voice of support as a former refugee and illegal alien living in the United States before to the plea of the residents who are coming from other parts of the world, specifically from Africa. We are seeing an increased wave of Africans coming to Canada because they are escaping Donald Trump's illegal crackdown on humans. I agree with the deputies. We should request Mark Carney to pay his bills. His austerity plans that he has been saying all over the social media. I never thought he was going to touch an important subject that is close to the heart of many of immigrants in the city of Toronto, not to allow the repeat of the previous years where claimants were sleeping outside the office on Peter Street, the referral center. With regards to the Ontario Housing Canada benefit, we're seeing a decrease. I came last week and I spoke about how we can increase transitional housing for those who are coming from the shelters and encampments. But it seems that is not a priority for Doug Ford or the government of Mark Carney. We need to have transitional housing to ensure that future residents who come to live at buildings where people are aging in place, like 220 Oak Street, my building, Toronto Community Housing.
We're good. That is all the speaker in front of us. I know some of the staff have some questions. Councillor Bravo and then Carol.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question has to do with the direction that the federal government provided municipalities, particularly the City of Toronto, regarding what kind of refugee-serving solutions would be desirable and appropriate because they're effective. Is it accurate to say that the effort that's been made to build 250 new beds in places like Romero House, as Francesca just described, has been done in a very short amount of time on the road to 500? Is it accurate that that was with the explicit support of and sort of endorsement of the federal government?
So to you, Chair, yes, Councillor Bravo, it's in line with the direction in which the federal government would like to go. Yep.
So the City of Toronto has taken up this work, recognizing that outcomes are much better when, as the last deputant described, the wraparounds are there. People can quickly get a work permit, get to work, and start contributing, as Samuel described, a personal support worker who was a hero during the pandemic and was a refugee. So we know that the outcomes for people are going to be better, and that they may enter into permanent housing much quicker. Is that correct, compared to the base shelter system?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Can you describe some of the new beds that were created under this with the endorsement of the federal government as a strategy? What kinds of projects were approved, and what kinds of new beds have come on?
So to the chair, to name a few, certainly one that was spoken about with Romero House. There's another program with the Canadian Mental Health Association that is specialized to meet people's needs who may be experiencing trauma or mental health issues, and a new program with La Passerelle, which is a Francophone program for African Francophone-speaking folks that are arriving as refugee claimants.
Thank you. In terms of the letter that was sent by the federal government, is it fair to say that there is an understanding that they want to, on a more permanent basis, delegate the responsibility for refugees to municipalities? Is that a fair assessment? That they are walking away or minimizing their leadership role and responsibility. Is that fair?
So to you, Chair, it would seem, with respect to the funding that has been announced for Toronto and changing eligibility criteria for that funding, that this signals a change in the federal government's responsibility in this area. Traditionally, they have paid 95% of the costs that the city has incurred.
And compared to other municipalities, how is the federal government particularly treating Toronto, which faced the greatest number of influx of refugees and will continue to face that? How does the reimbursement offered compared with what other municipalities are set to receive?
So to the chair, it's our understanding that, Toronto in the year of 2025, or the calendar year, would have received 26% of funding for its eligible costs, where we understand other municipalities might have received up to 80% of those costs. That's not something I have in front of me to confirm, but certainly it would seem that Toronto is having a much lower proportion of its costs covered than other regions and municipalities.
No, can you comment on the Canada-Ontario housing benefit allocation that the City of Toronto is receiving, and the impact that will have on our capacity to move people out of shelters and out of encampments and into a home?
Sure. Doug Rollins from the Housing Secretariat, and through the chair, we have seen a dramatic decrease in the Canada-Ontario housing benefit allocation for the current year. Since its inception and the City of Toronto moving forward with focusing that COB on creating flow within the shelter system, it has been the biggest pathway out. As we build new supportive housing and bring on new rent geared to income housing, the COB has been a much needed relief valve, open to all households experiencing homelessness, but particularly beneficial for newcomer households who've taken up a disproportionate amount of that benefit. So without it, we decrease the bit of flow out of the shelter system, the encampment pressures and the winter planning pressures.
Great, thanks. I just want to sneak in one more question. It has to do with the regional settlement approaches that are necessary for ensuring that refugees are able to integrate into towns and cities where they have declining population and a need for workers. Who historically handles that? I'll note that in British Columbia or Quebec, and Manitoba, it's the province that leads. How can Toronto actually settle people into other municipalities and regions alone? Is it even possible?
So to the chair, it's very difficult for the city to, to coordinate programs at a provincial or national level. And so we'd certainly look to leadership at both those levels of government to support us to do that work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll.
Oh, thank you. I just want to unpack that a little earlier. Earlier, we adopted the operating variance, but I just want to underscore it in these questions. So that the money that we are not receiving is money that puts us in deficit in 2025 right now. Am I right about that?
To the chair, that is correct.
We are serving based on funds that we anticipated that are now not going to arrive. So that's the immediacy of the crisis. I'm right about that?
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay. So I wonder if we could break it down a little bit so that it helps us in our individual advocacy to help the mayor and the city manager in their macro intergovernmental advocacy. The $107 million that is missing. Previously, when we had that agreement that they were going to pay 95% of the cost, was it agreed just on here's the total cost and this is how much money you're sending us? Or were there agreements within that amount, within the IHAP program, of what the money would be invested in? Or was it itemized and broken down in any way? Did they know what they were supporting with those funds?
Yes, I mean, to the chair, we work very closely with IRCC in providing them costs that we were incurring over the course of past years, and it was a reimbursement model that was paid to the City of Toronto based on 95% of the costs incurred.
And was it, when it's 95%, when you say costs incurred, do we mean just putting some food in front of them and making sure there's a blanket on that cot, or did it include the expansion to meet the demand of who they were receiving?
So to the chair, it definitely assisted the city build that surge response that was required to meet the needs of thousands of more individuals that were arriving in the city. The majority of costs going directly to provide for the shelter, food, wraparound supports of the individuals in our system.
The majority, but for the surge response, did they understand that the surge, the expanding our ability was part of what we were asking for? And did they agree that we should meet that surge capacity at that time?
To the chair, that's correct. And in fact, after many years of advocacy, the opening of a Peel Reception Center as a first point of contact for single individuals arriving in the country was a great achievement with respect to the system itself and supporting people.
And when we had that agreement, there was no question as to the models we were using, the extension to peer agencies. They had no concern or questions about the way we were dispensing the funds throughout the service network at that time. Am I right about that?
So to the chair, you're right, with the exception of this most recent agreement, which introduced criteria that would encourage jurisdictions to move to more cost-effective community-based solutions as opposed to, funding of shelter hotels that happened during the course of the crisis.
And then my last question is this. Given the volume that we serve here in Toronto, and you have a knowledge of the system, I know, because you compare notes with colleagues. In comparison to others in the volume we're serving, we are probably amongst, if not the most cost-effective in serving the volume we serve with the funds that they were providing. Am I right about that?
So to the chair, Toronto provides a cost-effective response, as do other jurisdictions when we're dealing with the crisis. We did many things in the same way that other jurisdictions did: immediately open hotels, engage with our refugee-serving partners and determine how we could best meet the needs.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. On this item, I am going to say, I have Councillor Raffo and Malik and Carol. I want to say that intention the federal government is honorable to, rather than keeping people in hotels, which we had to at the time during COVID, having them in housing. Absolutely, transition housing with wraparound service, employment, get their application forms filled and get them feeling a sense of community so they can get to work, all of that, honorable. But we do have 26,000 people on the wait list for supportive housing. Not building enough, okay? So on top of that, yes, there's $1.5 billion the federal government had promised in the upcoming on the housing, this new government, except the wraparound services to build these supportive housing is missing because it's provincial government. So they're now into, the federal government will build the supportive housing, but who's going to actually do the support? Is it City of Toronto again? Right, so you can't cut off the funding now when the housing is not yet built, okay? Do the transition maybe a year or 2 years. If it is fast, we can do modular housing, maybe we can do it quickly, but we need to transition. Can't empty out the hotels if there's no shelter space. You can't empty out the shelters if there is no supportive housing. So that's problem number one. The second one is one of the best way, the fastest way, because some of the refugees, you don't need to provide food. They can certainly do food. And one of the best ways through the rent supplement. And even if they work, they may not have enough. They can just supplement the rent a little bit. Then they can go from shelter into housing. And it is a lot cheaper, financially a lot more sound, more effective. So if you cut off COP, which is the shelter allowance, from 38 million that we had in 2004 to now, let me see, 8 million. So we have 30 million less for support, for rent supplement program. At the meantime, we have this program that said that interim refugees housing, I'm sorry, it's nothing interim, refugees are continue to come to Canada. It has always come, refugees have always come to Canada through centuries, okay? And so the absurdity of this, the cuts is this. When they arrive to Pearson, until they put in the application formally, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or 5 months to actually fill in the application or find a legal aid or something. That period, they're not refugees, guess what? They're not refugees, apparently. They're not refugees claimant either, because the claim hasn't formally been submitted, and therefore, They are not responsibility of the federal government. By gosh, is that absurd or not? Okay? That's rule number one. Rule number two. Well, they can only have 90 days. That's the guideline, 90 days. They really should establish themselves, except, you know what? It takes 2 months, 60 days, to get a work permit the fastest way. So they have 30 days to go, once they have a work permit, to find a job, save enough money for the first and last month so they can move out of their shelter. Is that realistic? That's the second absurdity of this whole rule. And you have beautiful organizations like Romero House, Sojourn House, Matthew House that do incredible work. And they're expanding because you see the impact. They get the refugees the kind of support they get, and they establish themselves. And they are expanding, which is great because the impact is phenomenal. And yet they are now facing cuts, they're facing closure, they're facing uncertainty. So I ask all the councillors and everyone here, help us out, explain to our counterparts with the federal provincial government, come on, we can do this. We've done it before. We managed to overcome that crisis in 2023 and 24. It's now into a good path. The hotels are closing a lot more, right? There's a phased approach. You can't just go bang and just do it. It's because that's not reasonable. We'll build the supportive housing. We will get it done as quickly as possible, sometimes 17 days. Councillor Bravo, you had one in Ossington that was built, okay? By 5 minutes and up, let's do it together. Let's persuade the federal and provincial government to work with us because we know that we can get a head start for the refugees claimant and they will do very well in our city and in this country. So I'll start my rant. Councillor Bravo, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. This morning, about 40 organizations joined together in a press conference downstairs, and they, with one voice, demanded that the federal government pay its bills and honor its responsibility. If you ask the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Canada, who is responsible for refugees and for their needs in any nation state, it is the federal government, it is the national government. They can delegate to municipalities responsibilities, and that has been the arrangement. It's been a funding arrangement where the City of Toronto and other municipalities have played that role in terms of providing shelter. But they can't walk away from it. That is going against the covenant that was signed by Canada with respect to refugees. It's appalling that they're not paying their bills, but they're also walking away from the major responsibility of coordination, of ensuring that people are able to settle in communities where there's ample housing, where there's the need for workers, where people are ready to receive families, and that's all over this province. And that's all over this country. Unfortunately, we don't have a provincial leadership with respect to this coordination as we did historically, and that was my experience. When we landed as refugees, my family in the 70s, there was a welcome center at the provincial level, and the federal government was able to provide the essential things at the beginning so that both my parents were working within 2 months. And were able to build a good life here. You heard from a personal support worker who lived in a shelter during the pandemic, who was called a hero, and that's who's coming to this country. We need to have people come because we have a responsibility across the globe. We do a tiny fraction of taking refugees compared to other regions in countries that are much, much poorer. So let's do it right. The federal government cannot walk away from this responsibility. It cannot abandon municipalities. And I think what's most problematic from my perspective is that because of changes to the entry point and locating the entry point at Pearson, we faced that massive refugee crisis, particularly with East African refugees. That was a federal government decision. There was no one receiving. Canada Border Service agents were saying, go to Peter Street in Toronto, go to sleep on the street in flip-flops without a winter coat in the middle of winter. Yes, communities stepped up, but the enormous pressure is the kinds of surges that will happen again. The numbers have gone down, and that is we're putting us in a better position, but there's no way that the City of Toronto or any municipality could handle a surge as we saw at that time again. The federal government was saying, come to Toronto. Then we took on the greatest number of refugees. This city mobilized, and people did not want to see people sleeping on the street, entire families. We came together, and the civil society groups that were here today are an example of that. How, again, will they put us in this position, walking away from what is clearly the responsibility? It will result in people on the street. And what's so angering is that they're particularly punishing Toronto for taking more people, for having more responsibility. Toronto is the only city in Canada that has always had 500 shelter beds for refugees. And we're getting punished with a 26% reimbursement on what should be 95%. Compared to other municipalities, this is beyond an insult. It's a really mistreatment. We also have the challenge of not having that provincial role, and I don't want to let the province off the hook here, because if like in Manitoba and British Columbia and Quebec, the provincial government was at the table and said, you know what, there's a community that is ready to settle a group of people, let's support them and let's make that coordination happen, that would be a benefit, a nation-building approach to Canada, because that is what happens when refugees are appropriately settled. I think that what we have today is the people of Toronto standing with us and behind us, and we have to stand firm behind the mayor who's making this request. It's absolutely essential that we win on this, because walking away from this kind of responsibility when you are a national government who is tasked with this responsibility, who has signed international agreements, it's a slippery slope, and we can't let that happen. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Malik, and then Councillor Carroll.
Thank you very much. And
Councillor Perks, too.
And just echoing Councillor Bravo's remarks, and also gratitude for everyone who has come and spoken to us today, who has communicated with us, but who has been consistent on this issue, and for speaking and coming together in your advocacy and in this important fight with one voice. And in 2023, when the federal government froze funding for refugee claimants, that experience was on my doorstep in my community, and we saw those ramifications up close and how they permeated throughout our city. 129 Peter Street, the Streets to Homes Assessment Referral Center, SHARC as it's known, is in my ward. And people were being directed by airport agents and other federal counterparts to come there. And staff at that site and across so many others in the city were doing their best to provide services, to provide information, food, medical attention, and necessary supplies to people who are gathered there. And I do have to recognize also the local community in the area, the Business Improvement Association, and residents who saw what was happening and stepped up and asked what they could do. And, I said it then and I'll say it now, that situation was unconscionable, and it was a very difficult moment for our city. And in that difficult moment, social service organizations, Black churches across the city, communities who have also had that experience of a refugee situation stepped up to care for people. And I'm so glad that they did, and we recognized their leadership, and we also repeated that it's not their job, right? That's not their responsibility. It is squarely in the federal government's jurisdiction, and we work together with them and their leadership. And as we've said, them paying that bill is the difference in people's lives and livelihoods. And in a city like ours, we should be able to welcome people at the maximum capacity that we can provide, who are seeking safety from persecution, and who are looking for a better life, who are looking to be with us alongside in that work to build a city that we're proud of. And the City of Toronto should have the resources committed by the federal government to do this, and it is completely outrageous that that is not the case. And in this crisis, and through many conversations with refugee and homelessness advocates and serving organizations, we learned a few important things. First, that refugees and asylum seekers need different supports than unhoused folks living in Toronto, and that supports from all levels of government are needed, not just for funding, but also for transportation and coordination across our municipalities and across other municipalities. And as a city, we have worked very hard to implement those lessons. And again, I want to give so much gratitude and credit to city staff and our community organizations who have stepped up to that task and made sure that through that experience, we were coming out stronger. The federal government now backtracking on these important lessons and absolving themselves on their clear responsibility is unacceptable. The situation we experienced was unconscionable then, and this choice right now is unconscionable, and we can't go back. I support Mayor Chow's leadership on this issue, and I look forward to our collective work for them to make a better choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, and then Perks.
Well, I think Deputy Mayor Malik's final sentence is actually quite hopeful. They just need to make a better choice, and I think the key is understanding. That's why I asked the questions I asked. In my own individual advocacy, I've realized that when it's almost sometimes it hurts when you have such a good resolution that we had in 2023, Mayor Chow, when you resolve the immediate issue, understanding slips through our fingers again. And so in my advocacy amongst members of Parliament, I'm realizing they don't quite understand that we have the same mission here. We all want the same thing. We want refugee claimants and asylum seekers who come here to move from the shelter system as quickly as possible into housing. We actually both want the same thing. Mm-hmm. And the understanding of how we go about it, how efficiently we do it, that we do it in an integrated partnership model. When you hear from refugee house managers here, that's part of the model, that all of this is happening in a way that we're actually their partner. You know, we take those people who don't fit neatly into the IRCC process, and we try to do our best for them. And if at all possible, we try to keep them off the street and out of parks, but we need the investment to do that. And how we do it as affordably as possible is really nothing short of miraculous. And what is special about what was agreed to in 2023 is there was at that moment an understanding of how we work those miracles, and that we should keep doing it, and that yes, it won't just be a matter of we need this much to feed them and put them in the roofs that we already have, but we have to build a model for surge capacity so that we don't have a 2023 situation. And there was an agreement and an understanding at that time that that's going to require that investment, that is part of what we were getting in IHAP. And the need for it hasn't changed. It ebbs and flows, as one of our deputants said. So while it may be down today, we know from the uncertainty in parts of this world that it will flow again. It's ebbing at the moment, but it will flow again. And with partnership, and we know this federal government wants to be a good partner. With their partnership, we can take care of that for them. We're best placed to take care of it for them, coordinating with all the types of servers we heard from today. But I think there has to be an understanding that we have that same mission, and that what you give us, we don't make it our mission to burn through it for fun. We actually do it to serve these people and make sure they can have great lives in Canada. And so I'm hopeful. I want to be hopeful at this time that it's not even October yet. And well, that's right around the corner, but it's not even October yet. And here we are in the financial year where this is hitting us. It's hitting us right now. But let's look at our two financial calendars and let's actually have the conversations that will get us to the point where we can resolve this and meet the mission that both governments have, which is getting these people, refugees and asylum seekers in particular, from shelter into housing as quickly as possible.
Councillor, maybe I could ask a question because I noticed one point. Some of the other members here are on FCM, AMO. You have the immigration minister saying that, I don't know, in your travel, whether you've encountered it, immigration minister saying, well, actually, building housing, whether supportive housing or the COP, right, the rent supplement program, is the housing minister. And then there's the finance minister that hold the dollar for both. And what I'm experiencing during this conversation, and you may experience it, and I don't know whether that is the case or not, is that sometimes with new minister, it's different ministry. At the end of the day, it needs to be coordinated through the finance minister, because it seems like right hand, left handed, two different ministers. They're saying, well, it's your responsibility. And then it says provincial, so it's even complicated even more. So I don't know whether you've encountered that. It's a comment couched in a question. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. And let me begin by thanking the folks who came down, who work in this area and have experienced life through a system of bringing refugees into Canada. It's very important to understand that immediate experience. But I think it's also important to step away from the immediate experience and understand the context. Mark Carney became Prime Minister in a moment of national crisis by leaning into a conversation about the Canadian identity and global affairs. Mm-hmm. That's how he became Prime Minister, elbows up. It's very interesting that the elbows go up when we're talking about the effects of swift and unpredictable global change on the economy, right? Protecting our industry, protecting jobs. Where is the parallel commitment to protecting people who are arriving in Canada because of the uncertainties in the world? Where is the commitment to the part of the Canadian identity that has always welcomed people? In fact, looking around this room, all of us are descendants of people who were welcomed here. Just as there is a set of international arrangements on trade that is being upset, there are a set of international arrangements on how we handle people fleeing war and violence in their home countries. Where is the Canadian commitment to that? And that crisis is at least as severe. If you look what is happening to the south of us, it's not just economic craziness, it's craziness around refugees. I have a friend who's connected to the New York public school system, New York City being a sanctuary city, and teachers there are telling families, go to Canada. People who are undocumented in the United States are not safe. They know this. They're going to come to Canada. Or they're going to bypass the United States entirely and arrive here. This is a failure of the previous international agreements that is as important, and I would actually argue more important, than the failure of trade policy. And if you believe in the elbows up, Canada proud, look at our history and traditions argument that elected the current federal government, you have to believe that our commitment to protecting refugees and people who arrive here should be central to their work, which is why I am so lost in trying to understand why they are walking away from this. How is it this part of the Canadian identity can be shed in a crisis But the part of the Canadian identity that takes care of big industry and international trade is central. That's a mystery to me. I had a conversation with my member of parliament about all of this. And I was just staggered the extent to which he didn't understand the interrelationships between our investment in our shelter system and literally everything else we do in the city of Toronto. He didn't understand the impact that an overcrowded shelter system has on our libraries, has on the TTC, has on our parks, has on people who are fleeing violence at home or having a mental health crisis and live here. Didn't understand that if this fundamental part of our system fails, everything else we deliver is impacted, both directly and financially. We're not allowed to go and increase our spending mid-year. If we're going to find money to backfill the federal absence, it's going to come out of programs that Torontonians depend on. So yes, the federal government has a legal obligation here, but I would argue that the Liberal Party of Canada and anybody who claims to be protecting Canadian identity has a moral obligation to remember the part of the Canadian identity where we take care of each other. One of the things I do frequently is go to citizenship ceremonies. It's amazing. The MP is always there to welcome people and say this is a federal obligation, this business of citizenship ceremonies. Well, it's time they showed up at the front end. So let's keep the pressure on and make them remember what Canada's obligations are, what the obligations of this particular Prime Minister are, and what the obligations of each Canadian are. Thank you.
Oh, well said. Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to thank again, as everybody has, the incredible advocacy by everybody who came here today. And I hope they continue it, and our staff who works beyond any kind of expectation to deal with this never-ending crisis, to say the least. I just think one thing we're missing is the political reality we face. We've got to understand the politics of this, and we obviously don't. Those of us who are involved in the shelter system right now, we want to build 6 new shelters. You know what the response has been. Ask Councillor Bravo what people have been saying. Come to my ward. People don't want shelters. They're livid. They hate them. They have everything to say that's negative about us building shelters. Oh, there's a few that are supportive. Great. But the majority of Torontonians hate us building shelters in their community. Whether you go into Etobicoke, whether you go in York, whether you go in Toronto, they're all against shelters. So therefore, and even the federal MPs joined in the fight.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
They all did. They said, yeah, we're against the shelter. They wrote letters. Yeah. And the public all said, yeah, good, that you're opposing the shelters. So when the MPs don't respond in a positive way and they're financing their obligations, they are reflecting their voters. Their voters don't want us to fund refugee asylum seekers. That's what it basically is. They say no. And for us to say, well, we can't do it, it's a federal responsibility, the voters don't care. The constituents don't care. It's just a pissing match between the feds and the city. That's what they're saying. So that's why we're not getting the support of our federal MPs, and it's not a priority item for the Carney government. And it's not going to change anything by the wonderful advocates. And, we had a wonderful advocate listing all the organizations saying, do something about this awful lack of funding. I didn't see the Toronto Board of Trade there. Did you contact them? the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the banks in Canada, they're not on the list. They're not calling up Carney or calling up MPs and saying, hey, listen, you guys got to do something about your underfunding of your responsibility. None of them are. So unless that paradigm changes and they step up to support the frontline housing advocates, we're going to be in this pissing match forever. And we may get some kind of little agreement here going part-time, but we're not going to get a total coming up to responsibility from the federal government unless we get the business community, the commercial community, and get them to understand that it's to their benefit if there is housing for refugee claimants. They don't care about it because the stock market's doing very well. Their profits, look at the bank profits. Oh, they don't care because those people without housing aren't affecting their bottom line. They don't see it as affecting their bottom line because they can't see past the short-term profit statements. So unless we start to harass, advocate, push, and unless the public who are on the minority of the public, they're on the side of doing the right thing for housing people, unless they start to join in an effort to persuade the money people in Toronto, in Ontario and Canada, that refugees and asylum seekers, immigrants, even the word immigrant is a bad word now. You say the word immigrant. Everybody's, oh, too many immigrants. I said, well, you're a damn immigrant yourself. What are you talking about? You don't like these immigrants. Anyways, but so that's where the gap is. Unless we change our focus and we get the advocacy groups to change their focus away from trying to, sweet talk our MPs, we've got to talk politics to them and we've got to get different messengers. So whether it's Bay Street or, I don't know, other places in Canada where there's money, but they've got to step up. Unless they step up, again, we're not going to see any resolution here. Sorry, but that's my reading of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Deputy Mayor Ainsley, yeah, you might be right, Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Most recently, so one of the things my residents always find when you're talking about someone that's sleeping on the street, in a tent, on a bench, in a park, they don't know whether it's somebody that's homeless, whether it's a refugee claimant. They don't care. They just come to me and it's like, how do we fix this, councillor? And, I talk a lot about in recent years about the number of people that we house in our shelter system. And our shelter system is full. When I talk about the number of refugee claimants that are in our system and how we're trying to finance it, we can't do that on property taxes. And people's first reaction is go to the provincial or federal government. And then I tell them about these two programs that are being canceled or in danger of being canceled and the impact that it's going to have them and on their city. And we just had a slide presentation this morning about people's biggest concerns in the city. And having people sleeping on our streets, 3,400 people, claimants every night, has a huge impact on people's perception of what's happening. It impacts our transportation system, it impacts our library, our social services. Most recently, Mayor, I had put forward a motion in the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus on your behalf in the City of Toronto, and it passed unanimously. And every mayor that was in that room is deeply concerned about the trickle-down effect that if we don't see the proper funding for our refugee claimants to support them, that supports our city, what it's going to impact is going to have on their municipalities. They were shocked at the numbers that I talked about in the City of Toronto. And, I'm glad to see that we have a letter from the Toronto Board of Trade that's written to the minister. We need that. But as Councillor Cole said, we need the business community to step forward. I think we're doing everything we can as politicians. At the AMO annual general meeting, we had a number of delegations with different provincial ministers. In each and every delegation, it was brought up by one municipality or another that this funding cannot be cut, not just Toronto, but every municipality across Ontario. That if refugees are going to keep coming, we have to find a way to accommodate them, to work with them, but we need both levels of government to continue to move forward. So I'm very happy to see this, and I'm hoping we can continue to make some progress on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. The recommendations in front of you, all those in favor? Opposed? Carry. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work. And let's do it. I think we can persuade other levels of government. We'll see. Let's do some quick items. Deputy Mayor Malik, you held the Quayside. Can you just quickly ask it? Because I only have 2 items left. That's one of them.
Thank you. And are there folks here to respond? Yeah.
I'm sure there is. Just ask it.
All right. So my
and then the next one, the last one, is the end-to-end customer experience. Okay.
Thank you.
Speakers to that.
So my first question is just on the affordable housing, and how are we front-ending delivery of more affordable housing and increasing its numbers on this site through these approvals?
Through the chair, we're doing that in 2 ways. One, we're increasing the total number of units by almost 100 units. And then second is in a change of tenure, going from a condo-led project to a rental project, which allows us to take advantage of this kind of dip in the current market and not have to wait for the condo market to come back.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself? Because I know who you are.
Sorry, it's Hugh Clark,
Your title.
the Executive Director of the Housing Development Office.
Thank you very much. And to that point, despite some of the challenges we've been seeing with market conditions, can you outline how we're meeting our climate leadership goals and carbon neutral standards for this project?
Through you, Mayor, I can take that. It's Joe Cressy. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Waterfront Toronto. So as Hugh mentioned, while we accelerate the purpose-built rental and the affordable housing portfolio, the commitment on sustainability and an inclusive community stands. So Quayside will be a zero carbon certified and an energy efficient community. Practically, what that means, the project will meet the Toronto Green Standard. It will meet the Canada Green Building Council's zero carbon standard, as well as Waterfront Toronto's green building requirements. So affordable housing moves faster, purpose-built rental instead of condo, and still sustainable.
I'd just like to speak briefly to the item.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions to the staff? Nope. Seeing no other questions, Deputy Mayor Malik.
Thank you very much. I just want to briefly, first and foremost, thank city staff from the Housing Secretariat, Waterfront Secretariat, the DCM's office for this report and for the collaborative work with Waterfront Toronto. Earlier this year, I joined Mayor Chow with all 3 levels of government as we recommitted to the partnership to revitalize our waterfront and our work through Waterfront Toronto, which is such an enormous and exciting step. And central to that commitment is building new communities that are welcoming and inclusive and sustainable for all of us and for the long haul. And Mayor and Council have made it a priority to build the rental and affordable needed to make the crisis that we're seeing in our city one that we are working to not just get through, but get to the other side of. And this Quayside project is bringing funding commitments from all levels to get that housing started right now. And in the face of what we have been seeing and hearing, and I know that is something that you've experienced right across the city, that the condominium market is in a downturn, we have made a pivot that will get purpose-built rental, including affordable rental, into the first phase of this project, and the city has demonstrated its commitment through tangible measures to get affordable and purpose-built rental housing built through funding, through relief measures for development charges and property taxes, and supporting on financing, all in collaboration with other levels of government. Thank you again to staff for this work and to bring housing to our waterfront more quickly and address the housing crisis right across the board.
Great, thank you. Just people know, Shuffle is going to hit the ground hopefully very soon. 1,800 units, 3 out of 10 of them are going to be affordable, and half of them are family size. That is really great, which means that young families, whether they're nurses, PSWs, firefighters, police officers, teachers, can start their family right here. So let's have it happen and have more of them. Thank you for your work, everyone. It's good to have some good news from time to time. Your motions, all those in favor, opposed, carry, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.